Mr. Mayor, I have not read every single word in this rather sweeping report, but it would seem like the investigators have found kind of a willful attempt to not let the bad news about Frank Straub's bad behavior come out before the election. You could call it a cover-up. Do you agree that there was a cover-up?
No. This report is the culmination of an agreement the council president and I made several months ago to get to the facts. And as we have spent many months, thousands of documents, many different interviews, the conclusions of intent are drawn, and I don't believe that the connection to the facts portrayed, even in the report itself, would lead a reasonable person to that conclusion.
So, Mayor, are you disputing the findings of the investigation at this point?
At this point, the vast majority of the report I agree with, and we can take actions. And that was really one of the major points of this, is to look at a path forward of how do we make corrections if mistakes were made. Indeed, there were, and I apologize for those mistakes, but the assumption that there was intent is one that I would dispute, and as we portray in the report itself, there is contradictory references and really a conclusion that I don't see supports that at this time.
I certainly agree with you that the purpose of the report was far more to confirm that Frank Straub wasn't the right guy, and it's not intended to fillet the administration either. It's to look forward and see what we can do differently so that the employees get the best treatment from their bosses as possible. What about that?
Well, that is, I think, a critical issue. As you look, as I have said before, the confidentiality of employees weighed heavy on me. The second piece was the exposure to the citizens because of anticipated litigation. And the third piece, definitely in the balance, is the public's expectation of knowing what's going on. And as you look back to the employee, in hindsight, and really going forward, there is no expectation of confidentiality. And the reviewer herself comments on many of us that commented on saying that this, we believe, will bring a chilling effect when we can no longer really take the honor people's ask for confidentiality, and in this case a demand for confidentiality. And so we've already taken actions. We will be contracting with a firm to do a line, an anonymous tip line, so that people feel more comfortable bringing issues forward. But to the degree that we're able to give confidentiality to employees that in the private sector is standard practice, today the citizens don't expect that out of their public servants, that all personnel matters are now issues of public interest.
Mayor, the investigator also lauded you for the way that you resolved the Monique Cotton complaint. Your hands were tied in many regards with the way that you could do that at that time, and the investigator found transferring her out of that hostile environment was an effective way of dealing with the problem, given the facts or lack of facts that you had at hand.
Well, the paramount was is our employees, and still is. And we took immediate actions on those. We made sure that she had opportunities to grow here at the city. We had those opportunities in city government. And like I said, unfortunately, in hindsight, it's quite clear that the citizens demand that all personnel matters are not confidential. And that is the world we work in, and so going forward, that has to be very clear to our city employees, and there will be effects from that.
I agree with the investigator that you handled that just about as good as you could, given what you knew at the time. But I also agree with the investigator that there's the appearance that you didn't want the bad news about Straub's bad behavior going out before the election, and the investigator alleges that you misled the council in a letter, and the investigator alleges that the city attorney's office was stomping on top of documents that would have been embarrassing had they been released in a timely fashion in accordance with the public records law. how, I think most people who read this will get that impression, and so I don't know why you don't see that as well.
Well, the timely release, as I have not participated in public records since I came in, and I did that on purpose and quite deliberately, so that it was not perceived that the mayor had any influence, and there is no substantiated claim that I did have any influence in that. In that though, quite clearly our processes that there have been mistakes made. And because of weighing of legal liability, weighing personal confidentiality is my understanding, but the idea that there was influence from myself is completely unfounded. And from that of my administration. The issue back to the election time, the reality is I made a tough decision in September. You can see that we were fully forthright in that. We did not have the requirements of the public records or the standing litigation in that case. You also see that I had, in the primary, had won the primary by some 65%. I was not, and personally involved, or had been, and like I said, quite purposely, in public records process, because I believe we get the requests, I submit them as required, and that process goes forward. And as you can see from the testimony from our city clerk, that after asked multiple times, there was no influence on her of release or not release of those records. And so, embarrassing or not, to me, the decision was that balance. And we, as we bring on a new city attorney, Laura McAloon, I've already asked her to start that process by which we look at how can this be rectified going forward, and make sure that the timeliness and frankly our employees, the expectation of privacy is not one that is taken at the forefront.
Mayor, two more quick questions. In fact, the investigation found that the city clerk was doing everything required by law to get stuff out in a timely fashion, but the investigation found that there were some documents that people were looking for the clerk wasn't aware of because someone had not made the clerk aware of their existence. Specifically, the folks in the city attorney's office were essentially hiding these documents from the clerk so she couldn't put them out in a timely fashion. That's what the investigation has found.
Her conclusion there, of where the documents went. The documents were with the city's attorney's office, and that, in my understanding, was done because of expected litigation. And how to and when to release those, and how to redact those if necessary. And that decision laid there. And that's where a critical piece of this review by our new city attorney, after confirmed by the city council, will focus and determine how that is dealt with going forward.
Is that same prospective city attorney that you would like the council to approve, did she have a hand in changing up the original draft of the investigation to the draft that we've received today?
The issue pertaining to the initial draft is the group of four that was jointly appointed by the council president and I received a verbal report, and they reported back to me, and then the written report came. There were substantive differences between the verbal report to me and that. I had questions. I questioned the two that represent myself. They returned, as my understanding, spoke to Ms. Siebel, and she confirmed that she'd also been contacted by Mr. Brian, who also brought up concerns about that, and she said that she'd been thinking about it and she wanted to review that again. And clearly the evidence did not point to a direct or any type of insinuated intent by myself to make that, or by Brian Coddington, and the evidence didn't support that. I also believe, as you will see in the documents themselves and in the, I have not gone through all the exhibits, but some of the key exhibits, that it was clear that the documents resided in the legal department where those were being processed.
But if this was supposed to be an independent report, and then people in your camp can go lobby and receive a redaction, is this really still an independent report?
The issue is the joint committee represented all the interests, and the idea that you can't challenge the report on the findings, the facts didn't support that. And in looking at, she realized they did not. As you continue to look at the report, I think it does need to have the scrutiny to it and make sure that it's a valid report. You know, after this length of time, my hope would have been more extensive recommendations. There are things that we're still going to have to look at to make sure that the transparency is there and our processes, especially for our employees, are ones that we can stand by and support our employees.
I hear you telling me very clearly that upon review, there was not direct evidence linking you to people not adhering to public records laws, but the simple fact that that was her initial finding, do you think that could lead people to think that perhaps that's the basis for a recall attempt?
Well, as you can see from her cover memo herself, she said none of that influenced her decision. And so you'll have to talk to Ms. Cappel of why she made that decision. The issue in front of us, though, has to be based on fact of what happened rather than circumstance or bad timing or other pieces. The trust with our citizens is forefront of my mind. And we have to build that trust, maintain that trust. Is this a setback? Absolutely, and I apologize for that. But to race to conclusions, which unfortunately during this entire process, when we had made commitment that we would not speak and divulge information during the process, quite the opposite has happened. Even as early as today, after committing that we would not release and we do a joint release by the city clerks, the full report, unredacted under confidential requirements by Ms. Siebel herself, was set out to the press. So it's unfortunate that during this entire process, from the get-go, the initial questions that were asked of me were developed in order off city record email in the purpose of causing political headlines. I look to the meat of it. I look to the findings and to the evidence. It is also disconcerting to me, although in there that there are so much references to what was known by rumor or by press report. This was to be a factual report, and I think I ask you to go back and look at those exhibits, the timing of those exhibits and what happened. To jump to the conclusion of intent is a very far conclusion that I would not support.